Hello, welcome along to our webinar in the Beer Bitesize series. We will be learning tonight about how is beer made. So my name is Jayne Lewis. I am one of the business development managers for beer, and I am based in Melbourne, so I tend to look after the Asia Pacific region. Bit about my background. I've been a brewer for 20 years. I founded Australia's first female-founded brewery, and I ran that for 12 years. I now work with WSET to do one of the things that I love most in the world, which is to spread the good word about beer. At the start of this, I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge country. I was proudly born and raised on the lands of the Whadjuk Noongar in Western Australia. I would like to acknowledge you all for choosing to come along to this webinar to learn more about how beer is made and also to connect with like-minded individuals. While we're all here on our tiny little screens, I am lucky enough to work and play on the lands of the Wurundjeri and the Boon Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation. I acknowledge their custodianship and their continuing connection to land, water, and community. Currently in Naarm, which is Melbourne, we're experiencing some very warm weather, and I'm grateful to live close to the water, where I go to reset my mind and connect with my body. I'd also like to offer my respects to elders past, present, and emerging leaders. All right, let's get into the beer stuff. So, wanted to welcome you along and just give you a bit of background about the Wine and Spirit Education Trust, or WSET, which is the world's leading provider of qualifications and courses in both wine, spirits, sake, and beer. So WSET has over 50 years experience in designing and delivering education to help both professionals and consumer enthusiasts to learn more about wine, spirits, sake, and beer. So you can take WSET qualifications in over 70 countries through a network of more than 800 course providers. So if you're ever interested in finding anything more about embarking on a journey with a WSET qualification, you can visit wsetglobal.com to find your nearest course provider. So this session is going to be recorded and will be available to watch via the WSET Global Events Hub on YouTube. If you have any questions, please pop them into the Q&A box, which is separate to the chat box, and we will endeavour to cover as many of these at the end as is possible. The wonderful Emily from the events team will be helping on the back of house stuff. Also, I would really love to know more about you guys. So I've got a little poll, which you can just tell me about a little bit about your background in terms of where it is that you work, what you do, and then I will be able to see who is watching, who's turned up to say hello and to learn a little bit more about beer today. So that's up on your screens now. Please fill that in for me. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Okay. So we're going to dive right in and get into talking about how is beer made. So what we're going to look at with that is the main ingredients of beer. So there are 4 main ingredients and also the 6 stages of beer production. So you can see a little snippet of a brewery on your screen there, which is something that makes me incredibly happy, and somewhere where I am most comfortable is in amongst the stainless steel. So it gives me great pleasure to be able to speak to you about how beer is made. Okay, so for me, you can't talk about how beer is made without a little introduction into the four main ingredients. So this is just a little taster, shall we say, about the main ingredients in beer. So I'm going to start off with malt, or our malted grain. So this is grain that has undergone the malting process. The most common type of malt that we use is barley, excuse me. And what the grain does for us is it's a source of starch and also enzymes. And what that does is that gives us the sugars that we want for fermentation. Plus, it also gives us the color and the aroma. So all alcoholic fermentation starts out with a source of sugar, and malted grain is where we're getting our source of sugar for the brewing process. All right, one that you all should be familiar with is water. And so for us, this is the main ingredient by volume in beer. And it gives us a liquid environment for the yeast to operate in. Then we have our hops. So hops are very specific to beer. They have antibacterial properties, plus they also contribute the really specific bitterness compounds that we associate with brewing. And they're also responsible for a lot of the aromas that we get within beer as well. So if you've ever drunk an IPA, an India Pale Ale, or a hazy IPA, then you would have come across characters associated with hops. And then our final fourth ingredient in beer is yeast. Now, as far as I'm concerned, yeast is responsible for all of the good things in the world. It is obviously used in making beer and wine, but also in production of bread as well. Yeast, as you probably know, is a tiny microorganism, and it eats up the sugar and creates alcohol, carbon dioxide, and also produces aromas as well. So I've just done a really, really quick summary about the main ingredients in beer. Natalia, who is one of the other business development managers in beer, she talked about this in much more detail in her talk, What is Beer Made From? So if that's of interest, you can go and find that on our YouTube channel. All right, so we're going to move into our beer production 6 key stages. So what we've got there is we've got milling, mashing, wort boiling, fermentation, carbonation, and packaging. So some of these words may be foreign to you depending on what your background is, but they also may seem familiar from other sort of alcoholic beverage production, so whether that be wine or spirits. So but my job is to take you through and tell you a little bit more about what it is that they mean. Okay, so the beginning part of our brewing process is starting out with milling. So what we've got is we've got our first ingredient here, which is our grains. So this was the malt or the malted grains that I spoke about on the previous slides. So the idea being that we're using the milling process here. So what you can see there is 2 rollers. And the idea with that is that they crush or just gently crack open the barley kernels. And what that does is it gives the brewers access to all of the good things inside it. So grains really are just a whole package of all of the bits and pieces that we need in order to be able to make the sugar, to be able to make the beer. So getting access to that is a really important start. So milling, that's where everything begins within the brewing process. In terms of mashing, which is the next stage that we get, we've got our vessel here, and what happens is we've got our grist, which is what we refer to as the crushed grain is called our grist. So then what we do is we mix the grist with hot water. So that's where we're bringing in our second ingredient. Then what's going to happen is that we have what's called our mash. Now, picture this like a really big pot of porridge or congee or something like that. If you've ever been lucky enough to be in Dublin in Ireland when they've been mashing in Guinness, you can actually smell it in the streets. So for me, it's a really wonderful aroma. And if you're in Australia or somewhere where you've got a lot of sort of cereals and stuff like that, might remind you of the smell of wheat bix or something in those ballparks, or a lot of porridges and all that sort of thing. So it is this big sort of, we've got the grist, which was the mashed grain, the crushed grain, and then we're mixing it with that hot water. So within that mash, what we've got is, from the malted grains, we've got enzymes that are present in those grains. And then the enzymes are converting the starch from the grain into sugar. So what that's doing is that's giving us our sugary liquid. And our sugary liquid is called wort. So this is the piece that we want going forward. So we need to actually separate there's a solid piece in there, which is obviously once you mix grain with water, you're going to end up with something that is solid at the end of it. So the byproduct, I guess, or the waste product we get out of this production is called spent grain. Now, this is, as I said, a waste product. A lot of the time this gets fed to livestock, pigs, cows, that kind of thing. And from my experience, the grain farmer is by far the most characterful person you'll meet in any brewing environment at all. So always good stories about that. So continuing to the actual process, we've got rid of our spent grains because we don't want those, but we've got our lovely sugary wort, which is kind of the color of malt, and has all of that delicious sugar in it. All right, so then we're moving on to our next stage in the beer production process, which is our wort boiling. So this is done in the kettle. As it would suggest, wort boiling means that you bring the sugary liquid up to rolling boil, with the idea being to kill any microorganisms in that. So you want to sterilize the wort, which will prevent any spoilage. And at this stage as well, we actually add in our hops. So this was the third ingredient that I spoke about. And hops are a flower that look, much like that diagram that you see there. And they contribute the bitterness that we're so familiar with beer, and also some of the aromas that come through on the nose and the palate. So after we've got our wort boiling, once that process has taken place, we then want to cool down our wort to a temperature that is suitable for fermentation. So what you see there is a heat exchanger, which is a piece of equipment where you pass cold water along one side of a set of plates, you pass the hot wort on the other side, and end up with cold water that you can use for the following brew, hot water that you can use for the following brew, and then cold wort ready for fermentation. So if you put the yeast straight into the wort, it would die. So we end up with our fermentation vessel here. So that cooled wort is transferred into that vessel, and then we go ahead and we add our yeast. So we've got the yeast going in. They are going to consume the sugar that's come through with our wort, and they're going to produce alcohol, carbon dioxide, and also aromas as well. So a very, very nerdy way of look at it, something that makes me smile, is that brewers make wort and yeast make beer. So that's the way I like to have a look at that process. So I'm going to take a tiny little side quest here, just to have a quick chat about hops. So we spoke about using them in the wort boiling process. And So if you were to use hops towards the end of the boil, so we have a process where that wort is being boiled to sterilize it, as we spoke about. If we add the hops towards the start of the boil, we're going to end up with a beer that has a lot more bitterness. It's going to extract a lot more bitterness from those hops if we add them at the start. And then if we add them towards the end of the boil, we're going to get more aromas coming across from those hops. So I like to think of this as cooking. So say you're cooking with a herb, like a fresh herb, right? You're cooking with coriander leaf. And if you add that coriander like right at the beginning of the process, it's going to be much more integrated into the actual dish. Whereas if you add it right before you serve, then you're going to end up, or, you know, as you're just sort of finishing off the cooking process, it's going to be much more aromatic, much fresher, and you're going to see a lot more of that character there. And then taking that a bit further, if we add it during fermentation process, which remember the temperature is lower because we've got the yeast having their action in there. If we add hops at that particular time, then that is a process that we call dry hopping, where the wort is cooler and we get a lot more of those aroma compounds that are really, you know, attaching themselves to that beer. So when there is no heat, those aroma compounds that are volatile, they aren't driven off, they're kept locked into the beer. So again, this is probably more like serving a salad and then putting some coriander fresh on top of the salad, literally on the table. So it's just an easy way for me to kind of look at the way you can use hops throughout the different parts of the process. So that was just a little side quest about hops. So what I'm taking you back to now is we were talking about fermentation. So, you know, at this stage after fermentation, we've got a beer that we've got alcohol, we have fermented up all of the sugar, and we've had some CO2 formation as well. So then we're going to move through to our next stage, which is carbonation. So with beer, as you're likely aware, it is carbonated. Obviously, if it's been served on hand pump, it can be lower in carbonation, but via the process, the fermentation process, it will still have a level of carbon dioxide that was dissolved in the beer. Okay, so the bubbles that are present are coming from carbon dioxide gas, or CO2. And that is dissolved in the liquid. And with beer, this also contributes to the foam as well. So yeast, as I said, produces CO2 during fermentation, but this can also be injected into the beer to achieve the desired level that we're looking for. So generally the CO2 level after fermentation is lower than you would want it to be for a finished product. So you can then inject carbon dioxide into the beer to get that to a level that is what you're looking for. There is also a process called bottle conditioning, where you can actually package the beer and then carry out a further fermentation in a sealed container with the addition of sugar and potentially more yeast. So that is bottle conditioning, which is quite similar if you are familiar with production of method champenoise. And at the end of that process, you would end up with that increased carbon dioxide and also some yeast sediment at the bottom of the container. So once we've got carbonation, it wouldn't be a webinar from Australia without some flies coming to the party. Okay, packaging is the next part in our process. Now, once produced, we need to get the beer out into the world so that people can actually enjoy it. It needs to find its home in someone's fridge or at a bar, in a pub, you know, needs to fulfill its destiny to go out into the world and be consumed. So once produced, the beer needs to be packaged for sale and distribution. So mostly the most common ways that we see beer going out into the world would be cans and bottles and kegs. So cans and bottles you're probably very familiar with. Kegs is the very common way to distribute beer to venues that have draft systems. So to be able to pour beer on tap, it's very likely they've got a keg sitting in a fridge somewhere and then pouring the beer on tap from there. This isn't an extensive kind of look at all of the containers, but other things you would be aware of is things like cask as well. All right, so just doing a little recap of the brewing process. We started out with our malted grain and then that being crushed open to give us access to all of the goodies. But most specifically the enzymes and the starches that's going to go and produce our sugars during the mashing process once we mix it with water. Then we're going to move what's called wort into our kettle where we're going to boil. We're also going to add our hops in the kettle as well so that we're actually getting that hop aroma compounds both on the nose and on the palate. Then we're going to move across to fermentation where that chilled wort that's come out of the kettle goes into our fermenter. And we're going to add our yeast and then our fermentation is going to take place. So we're going to have our sugar consumed, our alcohol produced and our CO2 and some aromas as well. And then we're going to move to carbonation where we're going to add in some bubble if we think we need it. And then we're going to move on to our packaging side of things. So getting our beer ready to go out into the world and be enjoyed by good people like yourselves. So that's a really quick wrap up of the brewing process. And just to give you a little taster, a little bite-sized snack, shall we say, of the brewing process. I would love to know what questions you have, so feel free to pop them in the Q&A box, not in the chat box. And I'm just going to pop that open now. And cool. Okay, we have the same question. Interesting. So both Richard and Morgan have asked how long is each phase? So in terms of the brewing process. So to give you a bit of an idea, it's very much dependent on the brewery, but I'll just talk about the brewery I used to own because that's a really easy reference point for me and gives you guys just a bit of an understanding. Something like milling can take 15 to 20 minutes. Mashing, something around sort of 25 to 30 minutes. The separation phase where you're actually sending the wort from the mashing vessel into the kettle, that can be about 2 hours. So that's one of the longest processes. Boiling process is usually sort of 60 to 90 minutes, depending on the brewery. And then the cooling process, about 45 minutes. So for us at the brewery I used to work at, it was about a 6.5 hour brew day from milling in through to having all of your wort in the fermenter with your yeast added and doing your analysis. So I hope that helps to kind of understand a little bit more about the actual process for there. And then the fermentation is usually about 7 days, 7 to 14 days, depending on what kind of beer you're brewing. Maybe if you're brewing I haven't even sort of talked about ales and lagers, but if you're brewing an ale, it might be about 7 days, or if you're brewing a lager, it could be anywhere up to 28 days. And then there is a settlement process. And then packaging is generally carbonation in one day and packaging the following day. So I hope that helps a little bit more clarity on how long the actual process takes. Must be more questions out there. If not, we can just keep kicking along. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for attending. Maybe we do have another question. What contributes to different shelf life between beers? For me, a lot of it is around the packaging side of things. If you are packaging, you need to keep your oxygen low and protect it in that way. But a lot of beers are designed to be drunk fresh. So things with a lot of hops should be drunk fresh. So definitely something like a barley wine, a bigger beer with higher alcohol has more protective factors against oxidation. So you just kind of consider what type of beer it is that you would be wanting to age, and don't age things with hops or try to avoid it. Try and drink them as fresh as possible is the best thing to say there. Cool. All right. So you would have had a feedback poll pop up. So please, we'd love to hear what you thought about this webinar. The recording will be sent to all of you after this, and also be available to watch on the WSET Events Hub on YouTube, where you can also catch up on our previous events as well. So this week, Beer Bitesize Week, we've got how to choose the right glass with Morella and Marto on the 29th of Feb, and on the 1st of March, we've got how to taste beer with Sarah Hobday, who is our amazing specialist who developed the beer course, and Morella was involved in that as well. So two amazing ladies doing awesome things in the beer education space. And another amazing lady is is Natalia Watson, who did a session earlier this week on what is beer made from. And you can check that one out on that WSET Events Hub. So, yep, as I said, if you want to find out any more about our qualifications, whether they be wine, spirits, sake, beer, you can visit wsetglobal.com, look at the Where to Study page, and yeah, we'd love you to obviously join us. Beer is new. We're excited about getting it out and about to people and having amazing conversations, helping people to build confidence, try things they may not previously have tried, and yeah, just get engaged with the world of beer. So I hope you've learned something, or at least enjoyed the session tonight, and really appreciate you coming along. And that is us done. The webinar is now finished. Thank you.